All right, hello and welcome. It is Tuesday, May 15th, and we are in week 3 now. That means you have finished your two main compositions for the month, along with the sound design. You just finished out the Angry Bots composition and sound design. We're going to take the opportunity in this session to start out by listening to everybody's submission. And then we'll switch over to discuss the new assignments for week 3. We are going to be taking the music and sound effects that you have created and implementing them in the game using a piece of software known as Wise. And there are instructions on FSO, and later on we'll provide, in this archive, we'll provide instructions on how to get it installed, and then we will start a discussion of the assignments themselves. So make sure that you have your music and sound effects ready to go. You have the opportunity to revise your submissions after receiving feedback all the way up until the end of the month. You can actually even go through the process of setting things up in Wise and listening to them in the game, and then changing your music afterwards if you wanted to actually get a head start and put things in the game and just test things out, and then maybe spend the rest of this week and next week tweaking things. You can do that where you set everything up, and then if you change the music later, you can just, as long as the file's named exactly the same thing, you can replace the music that's already there or the sound effect that is already there. So we're shifting more towards the technical side of things in the second half of the month, and this is often where you would be, kind of not halfway through the project, but over the course of a project where you would go from having no music to having folders filled with music ready to be prepared for the game. And as more and more of the game is developed, you are plugging holes with different compositions that have been created, and start figuring out how your WAV files start making it into the game. And we'll talk about the technical process. But before we dive into all of that, we want to take a listen to the submissions for Angry Bots that were received. So let me move that out of the way and bring up Logic here. Oh, come on, Logic. There you go. So we have 7 submissions, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 submissions, and I've created markers so you can see everybody's last name up here. Well, maybe. Come on, Logic. There we go. You can see everybody's last name up there. And so if you submitted yours, you can see which one is your submission. So we will start out by talking about kind of the composition as a whole, the music and how everything is to be set up, and then we'll go through and listen to them one by one. So what I have here is, you will notice that this round everything is set up vertically instead of horizontally. Last time each student had their own track. This time we're sharing the tracks, but they're kind of vertically stacked on top of each other, because eventually they'll need to play together at the same time. Well, come on, Logic. You are certainly slow to update and respond. All right, so let's talk about, we have one track for ambient, one for buzzer action, mech action, spider action, and the stingers. If I can make it scroll back to the front here. Each one of these cues is to be 1 to 2 minutes long. They are going to need to loop and play back together in sync. So they all need to start at the same time. They need to end at the same time. They need to be the same length. and ultimately they need to be able to play together. So that means they'll be in the same key, they will be in the same tempo and time signature, and they will follow a similar progression so that they can all play and lock in together at any point. Not that you're going to hear all of them at all times, but the game will have the ability to fade in or out any one of these four main pieces of music. So the ambient cue, one of the main things that we are listening for in this composition is a difference in intensity between the ambient and the action cues. So you can have a lot of instrumentation or just kind of the foundation of the mix with the ambient cue. You probably don't want to throw the entire orchestra or the full band, like a full drum kit in this ambient cue. It is foreshadowing what's coming up in the action cue, so often having a little bit of percussion helps. Nothing too strong, because percussion is going to be one of your main elements that's going to help you rise up to the level that you need to hit with the action cues. So whatever the power or intensity of the ambient cue is, the action cues just need to be bigger and louder and stronger than that. So that means you have to leave room for intensity with each one of these action cues. So that often means percussion, drums, some rhythm of some sort, and a strong thematic instrument, or maybe a couple that really sort of outline that particular character or represent that character. So even if you don't see the character on screen, you can hear them coming. You kind of train the player to know what to expect. So there has to be a noticeable difference when each one of these action cues is added in. No clashing notes, no dissonance between the different layers. That's mainly by keeping in the same key and following a core progression across all of them. And then we want to listen for some development over the course of these cues. It shouldn't just be a one loop that just sits there and doesn't really much change, or there isn't much change, but it's just following the chord progression. We're looking for some development, some thematic idea or kind of motivic idea that develops across a particular cue. Let's see. Ambient cues, action cues. We'll talk about the stingers when we actually reach those. I think that's most of it. I'm going to play the part of the computer mixing in these different layers. I'm going to leave the stinger one up, but bring down these. In fact, I'm just going to rename this so it makes it a little more sense down in the mixer. All right, so we'll start out by just listening to the ambient. We won't listen to all of each one of these. We'll just kind of get the idea, might jump around a little bit. We'll start with the ambient. Bring in each one of the action cues one at a time. We'll probably listen to them individually, and then later on I'll bring up all four of the faders, and we will want to double check the main output. I don't know if I'll be able to crank it all the way up. I don't want to blast anybody, but we want to make sure that the output isn't overloaded. The sum of each one of these individually might be fine, but the sum of all four of these together might overload the master. So these are all things to pay attention to. Let's start out with the first ambient cue. Right, we got a solid progression so far. Let's see if we get a change here. Right. So, chords headed in a new direction. Once the instrumentation is established, it's pretty much similar all the way across. So we would like to maybe hear one or two instrument layers kind of weave their way in and out of the mix. It's one thing I often reference for the ambient cue. Let's bring in the buzzer, see how this matches up. Okay. So this buzzer cue brings in more of the kick and snare. You got a strong lead line. You've got other instrumentation to support it. So there's an obvious increase in intensity. Watch out for the master. They're already getting really close to overloading that. There's a couple of notes that kind of clash between the two lines there. Let's bring in the spider cue. All right, a good rhythmic change here. Snare kind of sitting on top of the beat a little bit more. I might try changing the instrumentation a bit more from one cue to the next to make it a bit more unique for each robot that's introduced. Let's try the mech cue now. Right, so we have the brass introduced here. Alright, the main thing I'm listening for now is similar instrumentation. So again, like the horn helps the mech cue, but try for more unique instrumentation from one to the next. Everything fits well together, everything is looping. There's I only heard that one kind of bit of dissonance earlier on, but everything seems to fit well together rhythmically and harmonically. I'm going to bring in all four of these cues at the same time. You can see I'm already kind of overloading the master here. So definitely watch out for that. You're going to want to make sure that each one of them individually is at a good level, but it does not overload the master. Because it might sound fine when it plays by itself, or maybe two, but by the time you get to 3 or 4 of them, it'll start overloading. So let's go down to the stingers down here. Take a listen to those. Now, stinger cues, this is a good shape for these. They need to hit kind of a strong attack at the front of each one of these cues and then fade out to silence. You want to make sure that they are not rhythmic or tonal in any sort of way. You're not guaranteed where they're going to hit or where they're going to play in the game. So you're never guaranteed that it's going to be in the same key or at the same or on a downbeat of some sort and play in sync. So watch out for those elements. Let's take a listen to these 3 stingers. So they each have a strong impact, and I would say that this is one half of a whole stinger, where you have the bottom end, the impact, the kind of thump of everything, but you need something a bit more kind of in a higher register to cut through the mix that is going to have kind of a bit of ear candy, either a delay or a filter sweep or a bass drop, or it can, as long as it's not playing a musical phrase, it can be pitched. Kind of dangerous overall, but if it's like a moving pitch or sweeping pitch, that kind of helps. Anything with an LFO or a gate or some sort of modulation on top. So I would say that this kind of is the bottom half and needs a little bit more interest on the top. But overall, all of these parts will fit well together. So yeah, I think there's just a couple of tweaks in how they work together. All right, next here. Bring down these faders. And we will start with the ambient cue. All right, let's see if there's a change here. Okay. Oh, I got some kind of change in the progression. All right, so a great texture overall. The bit of hi-hat and the rhythm foreshadows what's coming up in the action cues. There's some interest and change and development. I was glad the kind of pad element came in at some point. I was a bit concerned earlier on where it kind of felt a little bit sparse. Like you have these cool little arpeggiated delayed synths, but then it kind of just goes down, it has big gaps and kind of goes down to just the hi-hat at parts. So I was waiting for that pad that comes in right around that. Then it kind of continues on all the way through. I'd probably bring that in a little bit earlier so it doesn't sound too sparse in the first half, and then drop out every time it loops around. All right, let's go to the buzzer cue. All right, so we got an added percussion, and we got the strong synth lead. All right, yeah, everything's locking up together well. It's looping together. You've got very noticeable instrumentation. Cool. Yeah, there's a good kind of change happening here towards the end of all of the cues. So there's a noticeable change through that buzzer cue. Let's bring in the spider. I'm kind of worried about the dissonance of the spider cue. Let's see. Yeah. Watch out for that kind of 3-note pattern of the spider cue. Really feels very chromatic and feels like it clashes against the buzzer cue. Let's do the mech cue now. So we got the strong strings here. I'd probably... Let's see, go for a kick. Alright, so we got the snare and the spider cue. I think there was snare and buzzer also. Yeah, okay, so that's where you get the kick drum. I would also have larger percussion through the mech cue. Alright, so stronger percussion to really build up the intensity. I think the strings hit it, but the rhythm, I think that's mostly pushed by the spider. Spider throws me off a bit because of the dissonance. I didn't have much to say about the buzzer. I thought the buzzer locked in pretty well. Alright, let's go ahead and bring them all up at the same time. Yeah. Everything fits. The dissonance of the spider cue gets kind of buried. It's a little bit lower, but it can still kind of poke through. 3 stingers. That didn't work. Cool. Very good. Maybe a little reverb. Cool. I think I like the first two. The third sounds too much like a sound effect. Maybe could have a big kind of kick drum low hit in this first one. I think the second one works pretty well. With all these, you could always add a whole bunch of reverb on them. Yeah, I like that little swell at the end. All right, so excellent work. A couple of things to point out, but I think everything worked well together. Let's go ahead and take a listen to the next one. Takes a long time to bring my faders down for some reason. Right, I think the start out here, the pad just kind of drones on a little too long. Need some other elements through there than just the pad. Oh, there's another pad. Try something a little bit rhythmic, maybe an arpeggiator or a gated bass or something like that, that has a little bit of the pulse that's going to come up in the action cue. So a little bit more for the ambient. Let's go to the buzzer. Cool. Some good intensity here. All right, I think the intensity of the guitar, the power of this cue works out quite well. I'm listening for some like palm muted kind of chunks from the guitar. Eighth notes. Would also kind of help that pacing overall. See what happens in the spider cue. Okay, spider cue sounds a bit sparse now. No. Okay, maybe except for the snare, that little pulse there that is through the action spider action cue would fit pretty well to help bring that pulse to the ambient. Otherwise, spider doesn't have as nearly as much stuff going on as the buzzer does, where you have the guitar part, stronger percussion overall. So I wouldn't have it be just more guitar, but have some more kind of thematic instrumentation for that spider cue. Let's bring in the Mac. All right. Brass works, those big swells. Strings could come up to compete. Probably should have the strings have another layer of strings with a more staccato kind of feel. Again, kind of like that eighth note chunk from the guitars and the buzzer cue. So the mech definitely has some good thematic instrumentation. The buzzer also would be very identifiable. But when I bring in the spider cue, there really isn't something very noticeable that changes. The snare helps. Watch the overall level of the mix. So there's some good intensity when it's all playing together. But individually, they could add a little bit more detail. Plus, it's all sitting on that quarter note. 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. To have stuff on that 8th note or 16th note could definitely help give you more room for some added excitement. So the foundation of it works very well. Everything loops correctly. Everything kind of fits together compositionally. So most of it is just a couple of details overall. All right, let's check out 3 stingers. Cool. I think the last two have more of the impact, and I think the first one has more of the modulation side of things. If I it's like if I took the first one and second one and put them together, we have the impact plus the cool modulation on top. So that's typically what I'm referring to. You still need that kind of low end in this first one. And you want these to make sure, because you'll feel the impact, but you'll also feel that from explosions and gunfire and all this other stuff in the game. So you want to make sure these also cut through with a little bit of little something in the higher frequency range. All right. So, another good one to check out. Let's try the next one here. Well, let's keep stingers there. And 3, okay. Yeah, here's your ambient cue. Right, so good texture to start with, a very subtle, very light overall, probably needs, I don't know if it's just more volume or if some of the pads need more high end to them. I feel a lot of this stuff would kind of get lost in the sound effects. So whether it's moving stuff up an octave or just having basically what you have there with a little bit of arpeggiator, a couple of pads. You definitely kind of fill in the lower range, lower registers, but yeah, I want to make sure that there's something there to really cut through. That snare cuts through, or the kind of sounds like a tamale or something like that. But whatever that drum is, but there's that cuts through, but I don't know if it's just volume or if it is just frequency that's really kind of keeps that at a lower feel. Let's do buzzer. Percussion and brass work well here. The shaker helps to keep the pace. Brass could definitely come up. What's the loop there? Let's try that again. Oh, you know what it is? Is the shaker. I don't hear the shaker on the first beat. like kind of just hiccups there. It's not really the music so much, or just like maybe one or two instruments. So, but an obvious intensity change when we get to the buzzer, so that works. Let's go to the spider cue. Okay, so we kind of doubled up, sped up the shaker and the hi-hat. Now, so the shaker, or whatever, the shaker hi-hat is faster, but the rest of the instrumentation is much more sustained. So you could definitely hear something else, probably not on the 16th note like that, but on the 8th note, that kind of holds the rhythm and the pace along with the that hi-hat. And then the rest of it kind of just sits there in the background, looping around. Definitely needs a bit more thematic instrument. That hi-hat will cut through, but everything else will kind of just be added to the rest of the mix. Let's go to the mech. Probably shouldn't have. I guess the hi-hat's a little bit different. But when playing with the spider, the hi-hat gets a little too much. There's a little too much activity going on. I think with repeating the kick drum on the 8th note without any velocity change gets to sound a little bit robotic. So, and then it also feels a little bit more repetitious without having any sort of change on top of that. So you might be able to, it also kind of feels muddy with this kind of wash of kick drum down at the bottom. So have something that is providing some variation, kind of bouncing against that repeating kick drum. Let's bring them all in together. And once you add in all of those kick drums and hi-hats, it doesn't, you lose kind of the patterns and the groove of each one of them. It just sounds like constant hi-hat and kick drum on the 8th note, or the hi-hat on the 16th. So add in more of the kind of thematic melodic instrumentation. Work on separating the grooves out, maybe using different kicks and snares and hi-hats and percussion. Use the shaker in one, use a hi-hat in the other, and you really get more of the sense when they all layer together instead of that constant. I think really the mech, let's see what happens when I take the mech out. Yeah, you get a lot of that rhythm back. And I can hear the strings again. So, just some things to consider when they're playing against each other. Let's listen to the 3 stingers. That works. Cool. Probably just more volume out of those, or at least that one. Okay. Might avoid just like a straight orchestral hit. And that one. This one has a little bit more interesting. You've got the hit and the kind of resonant tone. This one almost sounds too much like a sound effect, like getting hit with a frying pan or something. So I like the first one overall. I think the orchestral hit is doesn't fit the overall aesthetic of the rest of the mix. So good stuff overall. It's mostly about creating the separation between the different instrument layers. I think everything loops properly. It's going to play back in the game correctly. So, yeah, take an opportunity to check it out in the game. All right. Very good. How are we doing? 3 more. All right, the main thing that concerns me looking at this one is the volume, the mix. When I have all 4 of these, I'll just even start here. Right, so I don't have to turn them up very much to start overloading the master. I am going to guess one of the common occurrences with this is that there is a limiter on the master or a compressor on the master. And so in the DAW, when making and playing all 4 of them together, they're all limited together, and so it might be all right. But then when you bounce them out one at a time, each one of them goes through that limiter and might be completely compressed and have a huge level on the other side, so that like the 4 of these, when playing back together, will completely destroy or overload the master. So watch out for the individual layers and levels. Let's start with ambient. Let's see if there's a change. Okay, so the choir's added. I would watch out for just adding the choir halfway through. I would probably have a couple more layers, especially since it really feels like a 2-bar loop that goes around and around with the choir added in the second half. So I would work on adding a couple of instrument layers that would mainly treat the bass and the drums as the harmony and have some development over top. The choir could be one of those elements and have another one that changes, because basically 16 bars of this before choir comes in, is that my counting right? Makes for a bit too much repetition in the first half. The other thing is you have drums and bass and all sorts of stuff, which makes it hard, and a very strong volume, makes it hard to bring up the intensity when we get into these other cues. So let's bring up the buzzer cue. Alright, it sounds like the ambient cue might be in the buzzer, like bounced into this file. Hear a lot of repeated instrumentation. The problem is when that plays back in the game, then you'll double everything up, and you'll have twice as much of whatever that instrument is. And if it happens to be bounced, sometimes you'll have the ambient bounced in all 4 of them, and it will quadruple the volume of whatever's added. So each cue should only have instrumentation that is unique to that cue. And if that's the case, then you're going to want to add, when you take out the ambient out of the buzzer cue, you want to make sure that you replace it with some other instrumentation to make them unique. Let's go to the spider cue. Yeah, it really feels like you have the same drum pattern in each. And maybe like one synth. Oh, the swing. Ooh. So the swing rhythm of this one, now it does feel different enough from the ambient cue, but that swing against the straight ahead will cause some funky rhythms overall. And yes, it is in the same tempo, but it's going to just feel too loose against the other cues when they play together. So you go into this triplet feel. Okay, so this mech is definitely the most unique sounding, which is good. It does need to, like, it sounds unique in the fact that it doesn't contain any instrumentation from any of the other cues, and it has like a unique vibe to it overall. The kind of triplet feel will cause rhythmic issues when it plays against the other ones, but you need to make each one of these as unique as this is. They're going to follow a similar progression, a similar tempo and time signature, and same key. So compositionally they have to play together and work together, but instrumentation and overall kind of thematic idea needs to be unique in each cue. All right, so I think it's mainly formatting. Let's do this. Let's bring them all in together. And so you can hear that mech fighting against the other ones. If I take the mech out, then the rhythms lock in a whole lot more clearly. So watch out against that triplet feel in the mech, but make the buzzer and the spider, only have unique instrumentation in each cue, and then make sure the buzzer and the spider are as unique and thematic as the mech is. Then watch the overall levels of the bounces to make sure it doesn't blast the output. 3 stingers. All right, so these end up sounding too much like sound effects. The second one, this kind of hit. This hit right here. That might work, although it does still feel, especially in a game with robots and whatnot, feels a little too sound effecty, and the sound designers don't want the musician making music just as much as the musician does not want the sound designers to make music, because it kind of then you don't have control over what's actually playing back in the game. So make them more kind of musical sound design or tonal. Oops, get this out of the way. Than direct sound design. Also, they're too long. Make sure they don't get cut off at the end. They have that kind of strong hit at the front and then fade out quickly to silence. All right, another good one to check out. Let's go on to this one. Let's listen to the ambient cue. Right, so we got the pulse from the bass. We got some cool pads. We got a little hi-hat happening. So we have, and it's outlining the progression. So it's a good foundation. Probably needs another instrument or two that'll fade in and out of the mix. That will create that variation over time. Let's do the buzzer cue. Okay, so we got strong percussion and the strings. Okay. You might even add in kind of more sustained strings or even brass that will create a thematic line. Let's do spider cue. Excellent. Having kind of more synthy sounds. The kind of portamento synth, that one can come up a little bit in the mix. It gets hidden by the other instruments. Cool. So this one definitely sounds unique compared to the buzzer. Let's do the mech. Could go for a little bit more impact. I don't know if it's the mix overall. I don't know if it's like the drums are kind of rocking. You got the one synth, you got the low bass in there. I think maybe it's just because I came from the Spider and those instruments were kind of cutting through a little bit more. The snare was pretty strong. I just don't, maybe just from the mix, but I don't really feel the power from the mech cue. Let me do this. Let me take this out and bring this one up. Let's see if it's like volume. Let's say those right there, and then this one comes in. Okay. So that helps a bit. So the drums help bring up the pacing and the intensity through the mech cue. Try a little bit more, maybe some stabs, maybe some brass. I don't think we ended up hearing any brass anywhere. So yeah, maybe some brass stabs could work for the spider cue. I'm sorry, for the mech cue. Let me bring them all in together. So everything fits and locks together. The kind of synthy pattern kind of really sticks out because of the frequency content, so maybe having a little bit more variation there or even glitching it out a bit can help create some change. Yeah, so everything works very well together. Everything plays back properly. We'll play you correctly in the game. The middle stinger looks a bit short. That one concerns me. The overall volume seems quite low on these, so yeah, let me crank this up. So these definitely need to have the strong impact on the front. Probably don't need to have as long of a tail overall. Distortion helps a little bit. So yeah, definitely add in that strong hit. You could probably, there's probably a lot more detail in there than maybe what I'm hearing. So more volume on those, and that strong impact will probably help those things cut through the mix. Very good. Let's try one more here. Start with the ambient. Ambient seems a little bit low in volume compared to the rest. I mean, compared to buzzer, it's fine, but maybe compared to the mech and the spider. Yeah, could definitely come up. And there's something else in there, like are there strings or down. So something's in there. Definitely more volume. Probably whatever's happening in there could be kind of focused on and brought out a bit more. Let's do the spider cue. Oh yeah, ambient cue almost immediately gets lost when you get into the spider action. There's a lot going on in the spider, which is good. The string line, the snare. The one string, kind of the repeating eighth note string, could maybe go for a stronger attack overall and vary the velocity a little bit because it feels a little robotic. Let's add in. Did I do the buzzer? Let's get over that. Ooh, those seem to clash. Oh, it feels like it clashes rhythmically against the ambient cue also. So watch out for that buzzer cue. It feels like it, I mean, the spider and the ambient worked well together. I think. There you go. So, wait a second. Are the strings also in the mech? Yes. Are they in the buzzer? No. So it sounds like similar instrumentation is bounced into multiple cues. Seeing if that hi-hat was one of them. So watch out for the competing rhythms and the repeated instrumentation. Each cue should only have instrumentation that's unique to that cue. Watch the overall mix of the four when played back so that the ambient or the buzzer cue doesn't get lost. And then provide a bit more thematic instrumentation that can identify one robot from the next. Make sure these cues don't get cut off. They should probably have a stronger impact at the front. Let's see. Huh? Nope, they do have a strong impact at the front. At least that one did. Okay. Yes, they do. But they all sound... Yeah, all sound too similar. So that should work. Create two variations, or not variations, but two other stingers that head in different direction than that first one, and make sure they all taper off and fade to silence. All right, good examples all the way around. Lots of good things to consider. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you're watching this through the archive, you can go ahead and post up a question in the chat. If you're here, you can certainly ask me a question also. Right now we're going to turn it over to the archive, which will discuss the new assignments for week 3. and get into a discussion of using Wise with your 2D platformer and Angry Bots compositions. Certainly, while working on these technical aspects, there is a chance that you might run into some technical issues, and so I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to work through any of those things. Try getting into Wise and going through the projects earlier on in the week so that we can have time to address any sort of technical issues that you might run into. So other than that, thank you very much, and we'll move over to a discussion of the new assignments for week 3. So, I lost this here. But I do want to go through the process real quick, and the archive will probably state this again, but it's never too bad to see it a couple times, and actually it has changed just slightly. So you are going to be downloading Wise today, or this week, and you go to the website audiokinetic.com. They are the manufacturers of this Wise software. It is audio software that allows you to take your music and your sound effects and implement them into the game. It is a very, very popular software used by lots of different very popular games. And when you download the software, it'll have you log in and download what is known as the Wise launcher. And of course, you'll be downloading the Mac version. And the Wise launcher looks like this. I think. Where'd it go? There it is. It looks like this. When you first first load it up, it'll probably give you a whole bunch of news and information. But you're going to go to download the main Wise application. And when you install a new version, you're going to want to use this version of 2016. All of our games are built using the 2016 version of Wise. And so make sure you do not install any of these 2017 versions, at least for the purpose of our class. But go ahead and download that, the last current version of 2016. So I did want to point that out and make sure that that information is out there. There's also a lot of other fun things in here. One thing I do want to point out is that if you go into their samples tab, they have released something called the Wise Adventure Game. And it is a complete game project that you can implement your own music and sound effects. It is a fun kind of deeper dive, and certainly is a great way of getting information beyond the scope of the class. If you want to continue learning how music and sound effects work in the game, but they just released this very recently. And so I always want to throw that out there for people to check out. So that is the information I wanted to pass along for getting Wise installed. If you do have any questions, please let me know, but we will turn it over to the archive to discuss your assignments for week 3. Thank you very much. From the week 2 assignments into the new week 3 assignments. And I want to go over just a few of the aspects of how to set up your Wise session, how to use Wise, of course, and how to import your music and your sound effects and get them working in the game. There's a couple of things that will you want to make sure that you start from the very beginning to make sure that this is all going to work correctly for you. And the first one is to make sure that you have the proper version of Wise set up and installed. So for this month, we are using the Wise version 2016, and my version will load up here on this end in just a sec. Make sure you have the correct version of Wise installed. If not, you would go back to the Audio Kinetic web page and install the correct version, which looks like this. Hold on just a sec. Come here. Come here, web page. You would go to Audio Kinetic's web page and download Wise over here. This is going to download the Wise launcher, which looks like this, the Wise launcher. And in here, you want to make sure that you've gone to Wise. I'll do this later. You go to Wise, and you want to make sure that the version's installed. One of them says 2016 on it. If not, then you can do install new versions and make sure you have a 2016 version installed. It shouldn't matter which one you do, but just go for the most recent one, the biggest number, right? Which at the time of filming is 2016.2.6.6153. Just get the newest one and install that, and when you launch, it will look something like this. So, now, first and foremost, you need to have the correct version of Wise installed, and there's more detailed instructions on FSO to get that installed. The next thing would be to have a couple of files set up on your desktop to make this project work. So what we are going to do is we'll go to FSO here and show you all of the files that you have to download. So let me find that real quick. I am going to go. Let me get to the correct class first. All right, so here we are in week 3. You should download everything, go through and watch the Wise overview video that is an overview of Wise. It leads you through windows and menus and the overall structure of your files. And you'll download also the 2D platformer Wise setup and AngryBots Wise setup. We'll be talking about that next week, or not next week, on our next session, and our chiptune composition, which I'll also talk about today. So let's start out here with our 2D platformer Wise setup. In here, there's a video that will recreate a lot of what I'm saying here. So there's a bit more detailed information there. And there's also all of the downloads for the assignment. There is a PDF that also follows along step by step with all of this process. You can download the video from above, but make sure you download this 2D platformer Wise zip file. This is the session that we will be using. So make sure you have a copy of that downloaded. You're also going to need a copy of the game, which you should already have downloaded. But if you need to find, again, a copy of the game, you can go back to week 1, where we started 2D platformer. Go to the game composition assignment and re-download this zip file. That's where the copy of the game is. So let's go ahead and set up a couple of things that we need to. The first thing I'm going to do is just create a folder. I'm going to do this all on my desktop, and I recommend that you do the same while you are working on the project so that all of the files are easily accessible. I'm going to name this 2D platformer. And in this folder, I'm going to take that zip file that we just downloaded from FSO. I'm going to unzip it. I don't need the zip file after that. So I'll just take that folder. This is the WISE project that is provided. This is what we're going to use with all of the files that we need. So we'll just start with a copy of that. Then we're going to get a copy of the game, as I mentioned before. Go into your downloaded version of the game application and make sure that these two files are next to each other. This is extremely important to make sure that this works properly. If the 2D platformer file is not there, right in next to this 2D platformer WISE folder, it will not work, which is also stated here on FSO in the assignments. If these two files, warning, make sure you have these two files next to each other or things will not work. Right? So make sure if you are having any sort of issues at the end of this process, make sure that you have everything set up correctly. It will solve a lot of any sort of troubleshooting you might encounter. All right, the other thing we're going to do is create a folder called Media. And in this Media folder, I'm going to create another folder called Music. If I can spell it right, Music. And I'll create another one called Sound Effects. And this is, I'm going to put all of my music and sound effects in here that I created, just so I can have quick and easy access to those. So let me do that real quick. Let's see. I'm going to go back to my original composition files and a copy of my sound effects and bring them in there, which looks like this. So I'm going to go get all of my music files. I'm going to take a copy of those. Let's try that again. Drop my music in my music folder. Going to back up, go find all of my sound effects. Should have 18 sound effects. And I'm going to make a copy and put that in my sound effects folder. And this is for no reason other than to have very quick, easy access to all the files that I need. All right, at this point, I can launch WISE and make sure I open up the project to get started somewhere. It would load up. Should just be patient here. And we are going to navigate to the project that we need. You probably don't have this project right here. Your recent projects is probably blank. And we just need to hit Open Other and then navigate to that project, which is on your desktop. It's called 2D Platformer. You're going to go to 2D Platformer WISE. And then you're going to find this 2D Platformer WISE project, the wproj file. This is the session. Double click that and WISE will load it up. It provides you with all of the setup that you need to get started on the project. So we are going to start out by working on the music. We're going to get that set up, and then we are also going to set up the sound effects. And I will kind of go through it at a quicker pace here. It is explained in a bit more detail in the other videos, but I do want to kind of show an overview of how this is going to work. All right, so we have different layouts that we'll be using. We'll mostly be alternating between the designer layout and the interactive music layout. And I'm also going to be spending time switching between the audio tab, the events tab, and the soundbanks tab. So audio is where all of my audio is going to go. I'm going to import all of my WAV files here. I'm going to set them up and make them work appropriately for the game. Audio is added to events. And events are the messages that are sent from the game into Wise. The game has no idea about your music or your sound effects, has no idea about the audio. All it knows is that if it calls out these commands or these messages, that Wise will respond and play the correct audio file. So all we're going to have control over is when the music begins and when it ends. And this will create all of the interactivity that we need for our music. And then whenever we need a particular sound effect in the game just calls one of these events and it plays the corresponding sound. We'll have to set that up, but that is our overall approach with our events. So audio is attached to events, and both audio and events end up in sound banks. Sound banks are one of the final formats that is used by the game itself. When you are done with your session, you do not bounce a file like you do in a DAW. You create your entire composition and you bounce out the final version. Here in Wise, you are going to build the project. And when you build the project, it creates a couple of files that the game can use to actually play back while somebody is playing the game. When you go to sell and distribute your game, you do not want to have a whole bunch of loose WAV files sitting on the game disk that everybody can steal and change and have access to copyrighted material. So instead, these sound banks will encrypt the files. It will take all of your WAV files, all of the data that you put into Wise, and encrypt it in something. It's not really a zip file, but it can kind of sort of be thought of as a zip file, where it's a file that contains a whole bunch of other files that is encrypted and compressed, and also is set up to work on multiple different platforms. So Wise speaks the language of a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation, a Sony PlayStation, or a Microsoft Xbox, or an iOS or an Android device. It speaks all of these different languages, and the sound bank converts all of the files and is the file that the game actually uses. So this is just a quick overview of the types of files we'll be interacting with. So I'm going to start out by creating the music system. Setting up the music to work properly in the game. We have two events, when the music begins and when the music ends. So already set up in the game, when the game starts, it calls out this command or this event called play music begin. So when the game starts, this is what we want to do with your music. You have 3 intro files. The game is going to randomly choose one of them. It's going to play that file. Then when it's done, it's going to transition into the main loops. Then there are 3 main loops. It is going to randomly choose a main loop file and play it all the way through until it's done. Then it plays the next main loop file. Randomly chooses another one, plays all the way through that, and then it'll randomly choose another one, and keep doing that forever until the game is over. When the game is over, when you when you lose all of your health. The game is over when the character falls off the level, kind of falls into the sludge down below. When the game is over, musically, we want any music that was playing, we want that to stop. And then when it does, then we're going to play one of the 3 ending cues. Randomly choose an ending and play it. And then it will play it once, it'll stop, and then the whole game will start all over again. So that's a general setup of our music. We start out in the audio tab here, and we are going to drag our music to drag our music to this default work unit in the interactive music hierarchy. We have a master mixer hierarchy, we have an actor mixer hierarchy, we have an interactive music hierarchy. I think these are long, drawn out ways of saying something pretty simple. The master mixer hierarchy is all of our buses. This is our master output bus. If we had a dialogue bus, a music bus, a sound effects bus, if we had different groups of sounds or instruments or music together, this will contain all of our buses to organize it. Actor Mixer is all of the sound effects. When we set up all of our sound effects, we're going to drag the WAV files here, and we are going to set them up appropriately. The interactive music hierarchy is for the music. So basically we have buses, sound effects, and music. Each one of these has something called a default work unit. And we actually will not be using these default work units except for to basically organize our files. We are not, the basics of a default work unit allows multiple people to work on the same session at the same time or at different times. So you can, a default work unit is a unit of work. It's some files, it's some process that you want to do, and you are going to take that work, move it over to your computer, work in your session, and then bring it back into the main session. Since everybody is working on their own individual projects, we're really not using these to their full potential, and it's not necessary. But if you were working on a large team, it allows you to separate the work that's done by everybody and still bring it back together in a session that makes sense. All right, so we're going to start out with our music. I'm going to go back to the folder where we created and imported all the files that we needed, or kind of organized all the files we needed. I'm going to go to my music here, and I'm going to drag these into the interactive music hierarchy. And I am going to drop them right on the default work unit here. So I dragged all of these files down here right on top of this default work unit. And this audio file importer window pops up. Right now, the default is perfectly fine, and we can hit import at this point. There's a lot of settings that you could set up here if you had specific uses for the files, but the defaults will work just fine. We can hit import. It's going to import all of our files. We now see our music endings, our intros, and our loops in Wise. And we need to set up a way for these files to play back together. Right now, they're just individual, so we need to group them together in certain ways so that they play back correctly in the game. If you were going to load up a whole bunch of music for a party and you put it into iTunes or your favorite music player and you wanted to sequence them to play in a certain order, you would put them in a playlist. Playlist is a very common term for kind of sequencing music together, and we are going to do the same thing here. We are going to put our intros and our main loops together in a playlist so that when the game starts, it's going to play back these files correctly. I can highlight all of these files, and then I can put them together in a playlist. Let's see here. Can I widen this out? Show me all the buttons. Let's see. There we go. Sorry. Before I highlight all of these, I'm going to click on the default work unit up here, and this button right here in the middle says Create New Playlist, Music Playlist Container. This is the icon that we're going to use to create that container. Everything in Wise is a container. Well, not everything, but containers contain other files. That's mainly the approach that they're going for with that terminology. But if we want to now highlight all of these intros and main loops, we can drag them into the playlist container. And we're going to rename this. I can either rename it over here. I can right click and choose rename. And I'm going to call this music playlist, no, music, sorry, begin underscore playlist. All right. So a playlist allows us to sequence our files together. We have these files set up. I'm going to create another playlist. I'm going to click back on my default work unit, and I'm going to click this icon for another playlist, and I'm going to call this music end underscore playlist. I'm going to drag all of my endings here. And now, this kind of organizes them together, but it doesn't actually set up any sort of order or sequence for these playlists. And that is done in the interactive music layout. If I go to the Layouts menu, I choose Interactive Music, and it gives the windows change a little bit, and I need to go down here. This portion is called the Music Playlist Editor. So if I click on Playlists, I can see the appropriate order of all the files. So I'm going to start out up here, Music Begin Playlist. It's empty right now, so I'm going to drag in all of these intro files one at a time. Unfortunately, you cannot select and highlight multiple files at the same time and drag them in. Just click on each one of them, drag it into the playlist. If you accidentally click off of the playlist, you'll see these waveforms. If somehow you get lost in here, you see these waveforms, always click back on the playlist. We'll get you back to the playlist editor. This is one of the more tedious and difficult aspects of making this work, is just kind of navigating around. Make sure you always select back to the playlist, and you can have your 3 intros and your main loops playing here. All right. Now, this playlist says sequence continuous. That means it's going to play these in a sequence continuously. It's going to start at intro 1, and then it's going to play intro 2, then intro 3, then main loop 1, 2, and 3, which is not at all what we want to do. So let's start here. All right, so it plays them in order. Which is, like I said, not at all what we want. We want of the 3 intros, we want one of them to be chosen once, and then it's going to move into the main loops, and we want it to then randomly choose main loops infinitely, and just do it over and over again. So we need to group these files together. We have the intro group and the main loop group. I am going to click on my sequence continuous segment up here, so I guess it would be a group. I'm going to create new groups. Sometimes if it puts a group inside of another group, you can just kind of drag them out of each other. You want to make sure that each of the groups are on the same level. So we're going to drag these 3 intros in here. Intro 1, 2, and 3. Oops, I missed. All right, there's intro 1, 2, and 3. Then we're going to go main loop 1, 2, and 3. All right, so this still doesn't solve anything because, again, sequence continuous plays them in a sequence continuously. It's going to go from the first one down into the first group here. It's going to play 1, 2, and 3, down to the second group, a main loop 1, 2, and 3, and then be done. So we have a couple of different options here. We have sequence continuous, sequence step, random continuous, and random step. So we have sequence, the words sequence and random, and continuous and step. Sequence means it plays them in order. Random means it plays them in a random order. Continuous means that when the first one is done, it'll play the next one. Step means that you have to hit play each time, or you have to trigger the event each time for it to move forward. It will randomly set something up or play it in sequence, but it has to be poked each time to make it work. So in this case, the top layer needs to be sequence continuous because once it goes from this, we want it to go down to here. But when it goes into the intro group, we want it to randomly choose it, but we only want that to happen once. So we're going to choose that to random step. So it's going to randomly fire one of these off and play at one time, and then it's going to go down to the next one. This one we're also going to set to random step. So it's going to come down to this one, play, randomly choose one of them, and only play at one time, though, which is not what we want for the main loops because we want that to go on infinitely. So there's this other column over here called loop count. It says how many times do you want it to do that thing. And for the main loops, you want it to do it infinitely. If you hit the down arrow on this second main loop group, you can switch it to infinite, and it will play through this section. It will randomly choose one of them, fall out, but come back through this loop infinitely for as long as the game is being played. So let's try this out. If I click this main music begin playlist and hit play, it's going to randomly choose an intro, but only do that once, and then jump down into the main loops and hopefully do this infinitely. So it is switching, and it's doing exactly what we wanted it to. So random step will work for each one of your groups, and you want to set the music to be infinite. If it only plays one time and stops, we want to make sure that we want to set it to play infinitely. All right. So this is how this playlist should work. Let's go to our music end playlist. This is going to be really simple. We're just going to drag all three of our endings in here and set it to random step so that it just does this once. Randomly chooses an ending, plays it, and then it's over. The game will start over again, and all of the music will start again. All right, so this is how the audio is set up, but this doesn't set up the events. Once we have the WAV files controlling as we want them, I'm just going to go to project here. I'm going to do project save. We should have probably done that a while ago, but save. Also notice that it's not Command S, it is Control S to save properly in 2D platformer. For reasons that the application kind of thinks it's a Windows application, but it's just wrapped and running on Mac. So I just typically just go hit File Save to be sure. All right, now we have set up our audio. Now it's time to move on to the events. We have two events. We have music begin and music end. So setting up the music begin should be pretty straightforward. All we need to do is to play this music begin playlist. So let me take a step back here. Events have actions. There's anytime you click on one of these events over here, you're going to get access to these double arrows, and you have different actions like play, break, which will allow you to kind of pause and move on to the next thing. Post event, which will allow you to trigger any other events. You can stop, you can pause, you can mute, you can change a bus volume, you can change an individual audio file's voice volume, you can change the voice pitch, you can add a low pass filter, a high pass filter, you can change mix states, you can turn on and off switches, change game parameters. There's a lot of different things that you can do from these events. Remember, these are the messages that are sent from the game. The game knows nothing about your audio file. It just calls out these different events, and Wise takes care of the rest. So this music begin playlist, we want to play something, and then we hit browse. When you hit browse, it may look like this. It maybe looks like this, and it's kind of grayed out. Doesn't look like there's anything to choose. But if you go to the, let's see here, where is it hidden? What did I do here? You play, browse. I go to the actor mixer hierarchy and, oh, sorry, the interactive music hierarchy. I'm in my music. And I want to play this music begin playlist. Once I hit OK, well, actually, you want to play the music begin playlist. You do not want to play any of the individual files, or it'll just play that one file. You set up all the interactivity in the playlist, so make sure you trigger that. At this point, if I hit play, it will play that event. Notice it says play music begin down here in the transport, so you know which event you're playing. And it starts playing that playlist. And it gets to the part where it randomizes, and it will do that infinitely. So next is the end playlist. The end event. The first thing we want to do is we want to stop the music begin playlist. Anything that was playing, no matter where you were, when the game is over, you're going to turn it off. So we have the play event. We also have a stop event. We want to stop just this one file. We don't want to stop everything. You could stop all of the audio in the game if you wanted to. Probably wouldn't be a very good idea right now. But we hit stop, and we want to stop that music begin playlist. That will cut off the previous music. And now we want to play. And we'll hit browse again, and we want to play the ending. Oops, let me try that again. Hit browse. We want to play the ending cue. All right, so when the game is over, it's going to call out play music end. That's going to stop the music that was playing and play just one of the random files in the end playlist. All right. So that should set up our music. Let's hit play. Let's hit begin. Let's go over to the ending. And it should stop, end there, and be done. All right. So I'm going to go back to Project Save. Now that I have my music set up, I am going to go back to the Audio tab, and now I'm going to tackle the sound effects. These should be pretty straightforward. Most of it is just you have the events. Again, the events are really important. It tells you all of the files or all of the messages that the game can speak, all of the messages that it can send you, and you basically need to respond with audio. And you'll see these match the sound effects: bomb boom, bomb fuse, bomb pickup, bomb set down, enemy death, gunshot, health pickup, jump, ouch, and taunt. So we need to set up these events. We need to start over in the Audio tab. We are going to work on the actor mixer hierarchy now on this default work unit. This is for the sound effects. I'm going to go back over to my sound effects over here, and I'm just going to highlight all of my WAV files. Again, this is why we kind of organized it all together so you have quick access. Highlight all of my WAV files and drag them into my actor mixer hierarchy. You want to make sure you go on that default work unit right here. Make sure you drag onto that. And once you do, then you can see this audio file importer screen. Again, all of the files should be just fine. So we're going to hit import. I'll just go to Project Save. And now I have all of my WAV files. They'll start out blue. Blue audio files mean that they have not been converted yet into the format that is necessary for the game. This will happen when you build the sound bank. One of the things the sound bank does is compress all the files, convert them, change them into any formats that are necessary. But for the time being, it should work just fine that they are blue, but throws some people off when they see the different color there. So most of these are fine. If I just go ahead and play a sound, we hear the sounds being played.
Bums away.
So one thing we need to do are for these files that have multiple different versions: enemy death 1, 2, and 3, jump 1, 2, and 3, ouch 1, 2, and 3, and taunt 1, 2, and 3. We want them in a single event, or each one of them has their own kind of single event. We don't want the 3 files to be played at the same time, so we want to randomize them. So I'm going to click on this default work unit again, and up here, this icon that looks like all the little dots at the top, this is called a random container. And a random container allows you to randomize files. Anytime it asks, it's just going to randomly feed it a file. So we're going to create a couple of these, and I'm going to name them SFX enemy death. Probably don't need to capitalize everything. Then I'm going to create another one. Each time I'm going to click on the default work unit. I'm going to click this icon here to create another random container. And I'll just create a couple of them, so I don't have to keep going back. All right, the next one, I am going to go SFX, and I'm going to name this jump. I'll just right click this time and do rename. Oh, let's try that again. There we go. This time I'm going to call it SFX ouch. And the last one here is SFX taunt. There we go. So I'm going to take all of my enemy death files. I'm going to drag them into enemy death. I'm going to take all of my ouch files and drag them into ouch. I'm going to take all of my taunt files and drag them into taunt. Going to take all of my jump files and drag them into jump. All right, so this should get all of our audio files set up for the game. I'm just going to, again, go back to Project Save. Now all we need to do is set up the events, which should always, each one of these should be real simple to do. So all we need to do is go ahead. We are going to play a file. We can hit Browse. And this time I'm going to go up here to my actor mixer hierarchy. This is Bomb Boom, so I'm going to choose Bomb Boom. You don't even go to the next one. You don't even have to hit play in this. It'll just do it automatically. If you hit Browse, this is Bomb Fuse, so I'll set that one up. This is Bomb Pickup. I'll hit Browse, and I'll choose Pickup. I'll go to Set Down, hit Browse, choose Set Down, go to Enemy Death, hit Browse. This time I want to make sure I choose the random container. Do not choose the individual files. You want to use the random container itself. So I'll set that one up. There's enemy death. Here's gunshot. Browse. Gunshot. Health pickup. Browse. Health pickup. Jump. Again, I've selected the jump random container. Ouch. Select ouch random container. Taunt. Select taunt random container. All right. Now I have messages. Seem to work.
Oh. Huh.
All right. At this point, I am ready to go. I can build the game, or I can build the project and test it out in the game to make sure everything is playing back properly. And this is done by going to the Layouts menu again, and we're going to choose Sound Bank. And over here in the Sound Bank, you'll notice that there's one sound bank here called Sound Bank. It is set up for the Mac platform, and the English is set to, the language is set to English. So we're ready to go. All we should have to do at this point is hit Generate. And when you hit Generate, this message will pop up, and it says Evaluation Mode. Sound banks contain 27 media items out of 200. It gives you this generic message, and it should have built all of the files correctly. The way you can test this out is you go out of Wise, and you go to this game application that we brought into this folder. Now, when early on, we made sure that this application is next to this folder so that when you hit generate, it actually backs out of all of this 2D Platformer Wise folder and knows to go into here. And then let me show you the location that it drops the files. If we do show package contents, we can actually get a folder structure of this application. Go to apps, go to contents, resources. Now you don't actually have to do this, but it'll show you what's going on here. In resources, we'll go to data. In data, we'll go to streaming assets. In streaming assets, we will go to audio. We'll go to generated sound banks and the Mac folder. And right here today, at the current time, it shows that we have created this file. The setup that we have done in Wise is now going to play back in the game. So now let me back out of all of this. And you can now run the game application and hear your music and sound effects play. There is a little bit more information about how to appropriately mix and how to adjust levels. I'll leave that up for the video game. Well, you have to do it for the video game. I'll leave that up for the video to explain a bit more detail. But that should get you up and running and make things work properly for the game. Again, if you reach this point and you are in Wise and you have generated here, and the message that pops up is in red and it gives you all sorts of errors, read the errors, make sure that you're not missing a file. Sometimes it's complaining about the setup inside of Wise. Or other times, if you go try to play the music and you don't hear anything, it would be the fact that this 2D Platformer application and the 2D Platformer Wise folders were not next to each other when you built. So double check that. Or if you have any other issues, please get into contact with us and your instructor can help you out. So what else? Let me go back to here. That's the overall approach for 2D Platformer. And on Thursday, we'll talk a bit more on Angry Bots. I'll point out a few more interesting approaches for how Angry Bots will be set up in Wise. Please work on these projects throughout the week so that we can answer any questions before the weekend. Don't leave it to Sunday night in case any sort of issues come about. And the last project I want to discuss here is your chiptune composition. It's not entirely Wise. We do have a composition this week. We will listen in peer review next week for anybody that submits. But this is a composition in the style of the original Nintendo platform. It is a traditional linear composition. It doesn't have to loop. It's not interactive in any sort of way. The composition itself is 1 minute to 2 minutes long. And I'm most interested that you are following the restrictions of the original Nintendo system to kind of get a sense of what composition was like back in these earlier systems overall. And so with this project, I was a bit hesitant at first when we started this, thinking that it would end in less than optimal compositions, less than listenable music because of the limitations of the sounds. The sounds don't really sound all that great or aren't as interesting or complex compared to modern synths and DAWs. But what I ended up finding is that most people end up having your focus on the composition a whole lot more, and you're not hiding behind kind of the production and the sounds and things like arpeggiators and drum machines that will do it all for you. And so this there's a strong focus on the composition and the development of the music. So again, there is about a minute long composition. When you download the project, you get a session that a logic session that provides all of the sounds that you are going to be using for this composition, for this project. So some of the main restrictions are, number one, you have to use the sounds that are provided with the project. Those come in the form of EXS24 sound banks. If you click on any one of these tracks, they are all equipped with EXS24, and you have a couple of presets that were sampled directly from the original Nintendo and Famicom systems. And so these are very simple, straightforward effects. They're not all that wonderful sounding, but they are very musical, very melodic, and so you might spend more time at a faster pace or with staccato instrumentation so that you don't stick too long on holding a chord, so that there's a lot more movement and energy to the mix. So let's see here. Can I even get something going? So provided are a couple of chiptune sound banks. Let's see here, like drums and basic tones and synths. So you have to use the sounds that are provided by for the project. You are limited to only 4 simultaneous instruments playing at the same time. You can use more than 4 tracks. You just can't have more than 4 playing at any one time. So you can have as many as you want. Four. That means one of them has to be a drums, one of them has to be melody. You need drums and melody at some point in the composition. The other 2, you could have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, melody, or like drums, harmony, melody, counter melody, or drums, melody, melody, melody. Depends on how you want to approach it. But you can have any combination as long as you have drums and a melodic idea. Of course, the progression, the melody all need to develop over the course of the minute or so composition. You can have more than 4 tracks. You just need to make sure that they are there's only 4 of them playing at any one time. What else? So you have to use the sounds. You're limited to the number of tracks. You have to have drums. You have to have melody. Oh, the melody has to change at some point. In order to do that, you're probably best to duplicate a track. And let's see, track. Well, let me just do it this way. I'm thinking too hard. So duplicate the track, and then use another sound for your lead melody, but only 4 of them playing at any one time. So I have a couple of student submissions. These are some of the better ones that I've had, but it shows you the capability of what is possible. So here is the first one. Let's do it this way. Hold on, I want to make sure I have a volume control. One moment. Alright, so this one really shows why faster, more staccato movements and a faster pace overall works very well to maintain energy from the cues, or maintain energy through the piece. Especially this part right here. So faster arpeggiated parts like arpeggios, moving through the chord changes, work well to outline and give a lot of material to pull from. Here's the next one. Let's see, let's try this. So good energy, lots of changes also throughout. Big sweeps through chords. Having things on the quarter note, 8th notes, 32nd, or 16th and 32nd gives a lot of room for all these changes. So, and each one of these is only 4 tracks playing at any one time. They're just constantly switching their sounds back and forth. All right, and one more. And there's just a whole lot of movement in here. Again, these are kind of really classic chiptune approaches where you're repeating the notes or doing quick sweeps through arpeggios. All right, so a lot of activity, a lot of great ideas through each one of those. Certainly those are the top end of the spectrum of the overall quality, but hopefully gives you some inspiration about where these might go. All right, so that is all of the different aspects we wanted to talk about. We wanted to go over the week 2 submissions. Good job for everybody that did submit from the Angry Bots composition, and hopefully it inspires more people to submit for our chiptune peer review that we will do next week. And we talked about the 2D platformer assignment and the chiptune assignment. We'll dive into the Angry Bots later on this week. All right, so please let me know if you have any questions, and yeah, we'll keep moving forward. We'll get into next week and talk about wrapping everything up for the month. So, all right, let me know if you have any questions, and other than that, have a good day. Thanks.